A new poll says San Diego voters don't like either of the stadium measures on the November ballot.
I'm Jean Guerrero, just north of the U.S.-Mexico border. Marijuana has long flowed from Mexico into the U.S. Now it's starting to flow in the opposite direction, thanks to a rising demand in Mexico for California's potent strains. Coming up, a look at the Tijuana residents who seek out California's pot.
I tend to like my fairy tales fairly dark, but at the same time I also love sitcom.
San Diego Opera's new production of Cinderella will surprise you with its mix of elements. A look at what makes fairy tales so enduring and why we keep returning to them. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. A new poll shows support remains below 50% for both San Diego Measure C and D. Measure C is the Chargers' plan for a new downtown stadium. Measure D is the so-called Citizens Plan, which would limit bayfront development. Both would impose an increased tax on hotel rooms. The poll was conducted by Survey USA on behalf of 10 News and the San Diego Union Tribune. 39% of likely voters polled said they support the Chargers plan, while 30% said they'd vote for the Citizens Plan. According to the city attorney, both measures need 2/3 of the vote to pass. Another Survey USA poll finds a slight lead for Proposition 64, the measure to legalize recreational marijuana. That poll shows the yes votes at 51%. But a Cal Speaks poll from Sacramento State University gives the yes side a 30-point lead over the no's. KPBS's Frontiers reporter Jean Guerrero has been looking into what Prop 64 could mean for the drug trade. She joins us live now from San Ysidro. Jean?
Ebony, as we know, marijuana has long flowed from Mexico into the U.S. Now it's starting to flow in the opposite direction, thanks to a rising demand among Mexicans for California's potent marijuana. And Prop 64 could increase that southbound traffic.
Hay un lugar para activación física o un gimnasio pequeño.
Dr. Raúl Palacios shows me around Tijuana's public rehab center, Centro de Integración Juvenil. He says he's seeing more patients abusing marijuana, mostly Mexicans with visas or dual citizenship, who have access to medical marijuana in California.
La pueden conseguir fácilmente en Estados Unidos.
They can get it easily in California, and they bring it back with them in small quantities, generally for their own consumption. I don't doubt that they share it with their friends, too, but not on a large scale.
It's illegal to move marijuana from the U.S. to Mexico, just as it's illegal from Mexico into the U.S. But arguably, it's easier to smuggle southbound. You can drive into Tijuana without ever speaking to a Mexican official or pulling over. Vehicle inspections are sporadic. And we are now in Mexico. On a recent Tuesday, patients at Tijuana's rehab center watched an instructor describe the brain damage caused by different drugs. Some patients were there because of self-described addictions to California marijuana. I interviewed some of them and their parents. They asked me to refer to them only by their first names, because there's still a strong stigma associated with smoking marijuana in Mexico. So, Antonio, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how did you end up here?
Por mi mamá, by my mom. She told me that I got a problem with drugs, and so she sent me here.
Antonio has been using harder drugs like crystal meth and ecstasy. But it all started with marijuana. He says he smoked it from sunrise to sunset. Like many Tijuana residents, his go-to was medical marijuana from California.
The quality de la calidad de la marihuana es mucho mejor allá.
It's better over there, he says. Mexican marijuana has a roughly 2% concentration of THC, the drug's main psychoactive ingredient. The stuff grown in California is between 15 and 30% THC.
O sea, eso le gusta mucho.
Antonio's mother, Yolanda, says California's medical marijuana made her son hallucinate. The rehab center staff confirmed her beliefs. High doses of marijuana can cause some people to experience hallucinations and paranoia. She chokes up as she talks about her son.
Pues para una mamá que más.
For a mother, what more can I ask than for my kids to be okay, healthy, and be happy?
She says Antonio became convinced people were filming and following him.
Y no quiere que hablemos, me escribe.
He doesn't want to talk to me. He writes to me. He writes down his thoughts because if we talk, he thinks it's going to be published online. I don't know. All of this is just so horrible.
When it comes to marijuana, Mexico is a much more conservative country than the U.S. Less than a third of people in Mexico are in favor of legalizing pot, compared with more than 60% in the U.S. Earlier this year, President Enrique Peña Nieto said he was open to the idea of legalizing marijuana for medical use.
El uso de la marihuana con fines médicos y científicos.
Dr. Palacios, the director of Tijuana's Public Rehab Center, says the president's message spurred an increase in marijuana use this year.
Y eso hace que baje algo que se llama percepción.
It reduced something called perception of risk, or the idea that the substance can cause harm.
Palacios says the strong potency of California pot makes patients prone to symptoms of psychosis, such as paranoid delusions.
Eso hace que entonces...
So its psychoactive capacity, or psychoactive effect, is more damaging.
Another patient at the center, Rodrigo, says he started hallucinating after smoking medical marijuana from California.
Yeah, I had the paranoia. I thought I was being followed. They're gonna call me.
He says marijuana is more expensive in the U.S., but he always preferred to get it over there.
I have friends in Mexico City that they came over here. They didn't like to smoke marijuana, but I gave them the marijuana that I use in the U.S. and they really like it. It was more powerful. It gets you higher.
Rodrigo started smoking pot after it was legalized for medical use in California. He thought it couldn't be harmful if a U.S. state was recognizing its health benefits. At the time, he was going to school in San Diego.
I was really shy, and when I started smoking, I was more, how can I say?
Outgoing?
Yeah, outgoing. I was more outgoing, and I like that.
He says if marijuana is legalized for recreational use in California, the temptation and the risk for Tijuana residents like him is going to go up. For the full video of the border crossing into Mexico and more information, visit our web story at kpbs.org. Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
Thanks, Jean. President Obama is coming to San Diego this weekend to campaign for Hillary Clinton. He's speaking at private fundraising events on Sunday and Monday before going to Los Angeles for more fundraising and an appearance on ABC's Jimmy Kimmel Live. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton have jam-packed campaign schedules, this with just more than 2 weeks until Election Day. Today, I spoke to PBS NewsHour correspondent Lisa Desjardins about the race to the White House. Lisa Desjardins, thank you so much for joining us. With less than 18 days until the election, can you tell me, how are Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton doing in the battleground states?
Well, they certainly are moving one direction. It is away from Donald Trump at the moment, and that is almost universally across the board, with one exception. That's the state of Iowa, which is considered a toss-up by many, but that's where Donald Trump is still clearly leading in the polls. But one critical state, Ohio, now seems to be in a toss-up category where Donald Trump seemed to be well out ahead for quite a long time. It's interesting. I've looked at the polls to try and figure out what's going on in these battleground states, and there's something surprising. It's not a change necessarily in how women are voting, which might be what people expect, but instead how men are voting. Donald Trump is seeing a significant decline in his support from men in several key states. That includes Nevada, Arizona, and also nationally.
The presidential debates between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were some of the most watched presidential debates of all times. With that many eyes on the debates, is there any clear indication of who came out as the winner?
You know, I think both sides might point to they had big moments. Perhaps you should look at it this way, that Hillary Clinton certainly did not lose any of the debates, and I think that makes her a winner. Donald Trump, however, we saw headlines coming out of each debate that called into question some of the things he did. Of course, many of his supporters think, you know, his policies are great. They will point to his third debate, which was probably his very best debate. You know, in the end, good for Hillary Clinton, and it's actually remarkable to not have had any bobbles, any major gaffes during these debates. But I think, as is typically expected, in some total debates don't usually move the needle. The first debate and Donald Trump's performance there may have started this kind of momentum away from him. We're not sure. But he obviously had other problems outside of the debates since then.
How is this presidential race impacting the congressional races?
Right. there are a lot of Republicans sweating very hard, very profusely right now. It's not just the heat, which is unseasonable for some parts of the country. And we also are seeing a lot of change in money. We're seeing the Republican Party move money away from national into Senate and down ballot races. They are very nervous. But the question is, will they lose both the House and the Senate, or how nervous are they about the House and the Senate? The Senate, Democrats seem to be getting closer and closer to potentially taking over. They would only need 4 Senate takeovers if Hillary Clinton is elected, 5 if Donald Trump is elected. It depends on the vice president. But then the House, it's an unbelievable number, Ebony. To take over the House, Democrats need to take over 30 races across the country. And, you know, there are not that many competitive races anymore because of the way our congressional districts are drawn. So to win 30, they'd nearly need to win every competitive race in the country. It's not impossible, but I think given the way the race is today, it's unlikely. There would have to be yet another shift in public opinion for Republicans to lose the House.
Lisa, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
This November, California's Proposition 53 aims to turn legislative power over to the voters. KCET's Val Zavala explains Prop 53 would have voters instead of lawmakers approve any revenue bonds over $2 billion.
Prop 53 is about who should approve revenue bonds. The state issues bonds when it wants to spend money it doesn't have. Some are revenue bonds. They're paid back not by taxpayers, but by revenues from the project itself, like a toll bridge paid back with tolls. Well, right now it's the legislature that approves revenue bonds, but Prop 53 would have voters approve any revenue bond over $2 billion. Supporters call it no blank checks because it gives voters more control over expensive projects. Prop 53's key backer is a wealthy farmer near Stockton who has put in more than $4 million. Opponents say Prop 53 would reduce local control. How? Because some big local projects would need approval from voters statewide, voters who may have no interest in local projects. They also say it would delay rebuilding after a disaster because funding would have to wait for an election and voter approval. Finally, they say that wealthy farmer just wants to use it to block a major water project that would hurt his farm. Bottom line, a yes vote means you want revenue bonds over $2 billion subject to voter approval. A no vote means things stay the same.
And if you want to get a chance to vote on Prop 53 this November 8th, Monday is the last day to register to vote here in San Diego. Just go to sdvote.com to register or to check your registration status. You can also get a look at all the issues on your November ballot with the KPBS Voter Guide. It's an interactive website. Just put in your address and you'll see what's on your ballot with links to our coverage of the issues. You can find it at kpbs.org/votersguide. A San Diego-based sailor has died helping retake the city of Mosul from ISIS. 34-year-old Chief Petty Officer Jason Finnan died yesterday from a roadside bomb in northern Iraq. He is the 4th service member to die since the U.S. forces began helping the Iraqi army battle ISIS. A judge says a man accused of attacking 5 homeless men in San Diego is not mentally competent to stand trial. John Guerrero is being sent to the state mental hospital. He'll stay for up to 3 years or until he can be tried. The 39-year-old is charged with 3 counts of murder and 2 counts of premeditated attempted murder. He could face the death penalty if convicted. Tomorrow, 2 local events will try to tackle issues within the criminal justice system using 2 very different approaches. KPBS City Heights reporter Taryn Minto gives us a preview.
The organization United Against Police Terror and other activist groups will mark the day of protest in City Heights to honor those they say are victims of police brutality. That includes Alfred Alongo, whose shooting death by El Cajon police sparked protests in the community. A representative from the group wasn't available to speak on camera, but a Facebook post says more than 300 people plan to attend the City Heights rally and candlelit march. The post also says participants should not engage with or offer hugs to police, but does ask protesters to keep it a safe event. By coincidence, that same day, there's Mid-City CAN's Youth Power Summit, a conference on many issues, including the overcriminalization of kids and teens of color. College freshman Larissa Galeana will lead a session on restorative justice in schools, which emphasizes mediation over expulsion or suspension.
I've seen it help many people.
Like the kids at her high school who had once been labeled a problem.
And see them impress the teachers and just kind of like give them a place at school.
And she says it could help reduce the school-to-prison pipeline. Temple University criminal justice professor Nicole Gonzalez Van Cleve called the approaches complementary.
You know, when we're thinking about creating change, I was thinking the Mid-City can seems to be more of, I'm going to work within the traditional infrastructure, and the United Against Police Terror is more as the infrastructure is already biased, so how can I work within it?
The author of Crook County, Racism and Injustice in America's Largest Criminal Court, says changes to policy can take longer, and protests, particularly if they're peaceful, are a more immediate driver.
When we think about the social change that's been happening right now, you know, you can't in some ways discount the protesters that have in some ways controlled the media narrative and forced the media to take a long, hard look at what was going on in a way that we'd never seen before.
The Youth Power Summit begins at 8 a.m. at Lincoln High School. The protest begins at 6 p.m. Taryn Mento, KPBS News.
There are 38,000 immigrants in San Diego who are eligible for DACA, a federal program giving work permits to those who came to the U.S. illegally when they were still children. Today, immigrant advocates called on those people to apply if they haven't already, especially those in the Asian and Pacific Islander communities. Those who have applied for DACA say it's given them access to better jobs.
This DACA opportunity has completely transformed my life, my future. I am someone completely different.
Studies show DACA increases immigrants' wages and also boosts economies where they live. San Diego's unemployment rate was down 0.3% last month. It was 4.7% in September, down from 5% in August. The Employment Development Department numbers show San Diego still below the statewide rate of 5.5. San Diego is set to have its first ever cannabis job fair. Organizers say a marijuana boom in California has created new jobs. The event is being put on for the Alliance for Responsible Medicinal Access. ARMA says there are up to 100 cannabis job openings here in San Diego. They say whatever skills a person has, it's likely useful in the medical marijuana industry, and November's election results could increase the demand.
It is really a revolutionary time. The industry is growing rapidly. It's posed to be a $1 billion industry if Proposition 64 passes. And with that comes so much more opportunity. And as more and more cities and counties begin to regulate the industry, then more and more businesses are able to emerge.
The Cannabis Job Fair is this Sunday from 11 to 3 p.m. at the Handler Hotel in Mission Valley. It's free and open to the public.
Our election coverage continues with a look at the political fallout following this week's final debate. The San Diego congressman's voting record shows he's as loyal to his party as he is to Donald Trump. And will Californians say goodbye to the death penalty and hello to recreational pot? That's on the roundtable tonight at 8:30.
A mixed weather bag for San Diegans this weekend. You can expect some sun and some rain. Heather Waldman has more in tonight's weather report.
It's another very warm day in Southern California. The good news is this will be the worst of the heat through the rest of this week. The weekend is looking a lot more pleasant as one area of high pressure off to our east breaks down and another starts to move in from the west, bringing more of a return to that onshore wind rather than the Santa Ana winds, which come right from the north and east, right up from the mountains. That's part of what's been heating the air up so much. And of course, that hot breeze, not good for the fire risk. It's been very high the last few days. Still going to be there this weekend because, of course, the ground is still very dry, but it's not going to be quite as intensely hot. Tonight, mild. Temperatures stay in the mid-60s, but the clouds will be increasing as the wind turns more offshore. So Saturday, we will be starting off with a little bit of that marine layer, and that'll hold the temperatures down, especially at the coast. The rest of San Diego County tonight, looking at temperatures in the mid-40s to mid-50s around Ramona and Alpine. You head farther to the east, looking at mid to upper 50s in Mount Laguna and Borrego Springs. A balmy 64 in Mecca. Oceanside 50 degrees, but a little bit milder as you head a bit farther south along the coastline. Here comes that high this weekend. Again, one there behind me moves off to the east. This next one comes right along in behind it, and because of where it's sitting, we'll have more of a westerly breeze. That's going to keep that onshore flow. It's our natural air conditioner, if you will, because the Pacific Ocean, so cool. It's keeping that damp air in at the coast, and some inland areas may catch a little bit of that marine layer over the next couple of days as well. Could even be a shower or two on Sunday at the coast, and that's really going to help out with temperatures. We'll be in the upper 70s as opposed to the low to mid 90s. I'm sure a welcome change for everybody here. Mid 70s all the way through the start of next week. Clouds in the morning giving way to some sunshine, so a much more autumn-like pattern. Inland, similar trend. We go from near 90 on Saturday, so still a little warm, but more comfortable Sunday with the chance for an afternoon shower. Mix of clouds and sunshine Monday through Wednesday. Temperatures will stay in the lower 80s each afternoon, and we'll be in the low to mid 50s each of the next couple of nights. Into the mountains, watching for a passing shower on Sunday. Otherwise, temperatures nice and comfortable for the next several days. We'll be in the middle 70s Saturday through Wednesday. Expect abundant sunshine, especially for Tuesday and Wednesday, but certainly not bad on Monday afternoon either. Lows will be in the upper 30s to low 40s the next few nights. Final stop takes us into the deserts, mid 90s on Saturday, but back down into the 80s for a couple of days Monday and Tuesday before we reach 90 again on Wednesday. Heather Waldman, KPBS News.
If you think of the Disney animated film anytime someone mentions Cinderella, then think again. KPBS arts reporter Beth Accomando says the new San Diego Opera production of Rossini's Cinderella is darker and more complex, but just as charming.
Fairy tales are part of our DNA, says director Lindy Hume.
We are hardwired to recognise those archetypes in the stories. We know those stories from children, and we keep them in our lives forever.
Hume directs Cinderella for San Diego Opera. Lauren McNeese sings the title role. She says it's the ongoing human struggle that makes fairy tales so enduring.
And there's catharsis involved in that struggle, and watching the hero or heroine make their way through this storyline. It's the reason why we all love Lord of the Rings. We walk through it with those characters, and then I feel we can then address it to our own lives.
People have been enjoying the Cinderella story for thousands of years. It can trace its origins back to the 1st century and a story about a Greek slave girl becoming an Egyptian queen. But what remains consistent is an archetypal simplicity, says Professor Joseph Thomas.
Fairy tales and folk tales are marked by very simple characters and usually very simple plots, which makes them endlessly adaptable.
They have a simple narrative so that they can plummet into some really deep, almost depth charges of the psyche, because they actually mean something. Their function in our lives is a little bit of a lesson, a little bit of a roadmap through certain circumstances.
That's why Hume roots her opera in the real world, with portraits of real kings in the Prince's Library. Her Cinderella also draws in part on Perrault's charming French variation of the fairy tale, as well as the darker Brothers Grimm take. And in case you forgot just how dark those Grimm boys could get, here's a reminder.
When the prince is coming around to get the sisters to try on the shoe, the sisters can't fit their feet in. So the first sister lops off her toes so she can fit her foot into the sandal, or the shoe. The prince is fooled, and he goes off with his new bride until magic doves show up and say, "Look at her foot, it's a bloody mess."
The opera doesn't go that dark, but it's serious about the abuse Cinderella experiences.
For instance, in the Act 1 quintet, when you see the real abuse and you see her hitting rock bottom, then the aria at the end is just that much more exciting and rewarding for everybody.
I tend to like my fairy tales fairly dark, but at the same time I also love sitcom, so I like to blend those two elements but still come up with something truly touching and truthful for the ending, which is very heartwarming.
Rossini's opera, unlike the Disney cartoon, arrives at that transformative ending without resorting to any supernatural elements, says San Diego Opera's Nicholas Revelis.
Rossini and his librettist, Ferretti, assiduously avoided anything magical. There's no fairy godmother. Instead of a fairy godmother, we have a kind of philosopher, teacher, older, wiser gentleman of the court who is on the lookout for the perfect bride for the prince.
The tales are modified versions of an architecture that allows different tellers to use the stories for different purposes.
Each interpretation of a fairy tale is uniquely suited to the time period from which it emerges. For Hume, that meant showing the darkness before you get to the light.
It's a very special opportunity to create a production and present a production of this wonderful, nearly 200-year-old piece that is all about goodness in the world and the power of love and the power of goodness. You know, these are dark times, these are difficult times in the world, and I think when we as artists have an opportunity to simply present something beautiful to the world and make people feel great as they leave the theatre, that's what we aim to do, and I think we can do that with this production. So I just want everybody to enjoy it.
But please, she adds, don't come with a template of what you think Cinderella is. Instead, come with an open mind and enjoy the story as Rossini tells it and as Hume has chosen to interpret it for a 21st century audience. Beth Accomando, KPBS News.
We're going to close things up tonight with new baby pictures from the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. They have a new western lowland gorilla born 2 days ago at just 4 pounds. This is a highly endangered species. The new baby is the 8th gorilla at the park. Tonight's stories are online at kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend.